On Thursday, April 9th, 2026, at exactly 2:14 in the afternoon, a woman worth more than $4 billion looked at me the way people look at a vending machine that just ate their dollar. She told me if I could get her Bugatti running, she'd double my salary. She had no idea what my salary was. She had no idea what I used to do for a living either. Her head of finance laughed on cue, because that's what you do when your boss makes a joke. Even a joke aimed at a man in a grease-stained shirt standing in her driveway. I didn't laugh. I popped the rear clamshell of a car that had already beaten 3 specialist shops, looked at the powertrain bay for maybe 8 seconds, and felt something in my chest go very still. I knew this car. Not this exact one. The hands that built its heart. By the time I was finished with it, the man standing beside her, smiling with his hands tucked into his $800 coat, would be under federal investigation. And I would be the only person alive who could prove why. That's the story. Let me back up and tell you how I got there. My name is Marcus Cole. I'm 41 years old. I live with my daughter Lily, who's 8, in the apartment above my shop on Route 9 outside Concord, New Hampshire. Cole Precision Motorworks. 2 bays, 1 lift, and a narrow, specific reputation for fixing the electrical and fueling faults that make dealership technicians quietly Google things in the bathroom. I don't advertise. I've never needed to. Work finds me the way water finds a crack. Through people who ran out of other options. Lily was still asleep when the call came that morning. Her sneakers were lined up by the door. Her backpack was already packed for school. The way she'd insisted on doing herself since she turned 7, because 7-year-olds, in her words, don't need help with backpacks anymore. I remember standing in the kitchen in my socks, coffee half made, when the phone rang on the counter. Before Concord, I spent 6 years at the Bugatti atelier in Molsheim, France, on the powertrain validation team, under a man named Reinhard Voss, no relation to anyone else in this story, just a name life apparently likes to reuse. Reinhard taught engineers twice his rank how to listen to a W16 engine the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat through a stethoscope. He used to say a good mechanic doesn't fix the part that's broken. He fixes the relationship that part had with everything around it. I left in the spring of 2021, 4 months after my wife Elena died. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late. Gone in 7 months. Lily was 5 years old at the time. I came home to New Hampshire because Elena's mother was here, and because a 5-year-old needed more family around her than a 2-bedroom flat in Alsace could give her. I opened this shop that same fall. 2 bays. 1 lift. It's small. It's honest work. Most days, that's genuinely enough. The morning this started, I had 2 cars up on the lifts. A McLaren 650S with a stubborn ECU grounding fault, and a 1998 Land Cruiser belonging to a retired dentist named Harold, who wouldn't let anyone else within 10 feet of it. It was cold for April. Frost still on the windshields at 7 a.m. I'd made Lily oatmeal, walked her down to Denise's car for the school run, and gone back up to the shop to start coffee. I never actually finished drinking. I remember thinking it was going to be an ordinary Thursday. 2 oil changes booked in the afternoon, an alignment at 11. Nothing that morning suggested otherwise. Harold had called the day before about a rattle near the transfer case, and I'd told him I'd get to it Thursday. That plan didn't survive past 9 in the morning. The call came at 9:02. A woman introduced herself as billionaire, Chief of Staff to Alexandra Reyes, founder and CEO of Reyes Dynamics, a private equity and logistics fund headquartered in Boston with, I'd later learn, something close to $4 billion under management. Mr. Reyes had a 2019 Bugatti Chiron Sport with an intermittent fuel trim fault that triggered limp mode at random. Sometimes after 10 minutes of driving. Sometimes after 2 hours. 2 Bugatti certified specialists. One in Greenwich, Connecticut. One flown in from the Miami dealership. And one independent hypercar shop had each spent the better part of a week on it. Each time, the fault vanished the moment the car sat still for diagnosis, and returned within days of being driven normally again. I asked Nair what had changed about the car mechanically in the last 18 months. She said she didn't know, but that Ms. Reyes could see me at 1 o'clock that afternoon, at her home outside Lincoln, Massachusetts. I sat with the phone against my shoulder for a second before answering. A fault that hides from 3 separate specialists and only reappears under real driving conditions isn't a broken part. It's a broken relationship between 2 parts that were never supposed to disagree with each other in the first place. I told her I'd be there. I called my neighbor Denise to grab Lily at 3:15 if I wasn't back. Packed a bag of Molsheim-specific diagnostic tools that never show up in a general hypercar toolkit, and was on the highway south by 11:30. I ate a gas station sandwich in the truck on I-93, because I already had the feeling I wasn't getting lunch where I was going. I called Denise a second time just to confirm, and she laughed at me for worrying about it. Somewhere around Manchester, I remember turning the radio off. I do that when I'm trying to think something through before I've even seen it yet. The Reyes property sat behind 2 separate gates on 11 acres off Baker Bridge Road. Fieldstone walls. A pond with a small dock. A carriage house that had been converted into an 8-bay garage bigger than every building I've ever personally owned, combined. A young man at the front gate checked my name off a tablet without looking up from it. I parked next to a black Range Rover and a Rolls-Royce Cullinan. In the 3rd bay sat a nocturne black Chiron Sport with a hand-brushed aluminum stripe running down the center of the hood. The kind of finish, maybe, 40 cars in the entire world actually wear. Alexandra Reyes was standing near the workbench in a cream blazer, dark denim, hair pulled back, a phone in one hand. She had the particular stillness of someone who has been the most important person in every room she's entered since she was 25 years old. Beside her stood a heavier man in a navy overcoat, early 50s, deeply tanned for April in New England. Victor Kane, Chief Financial Officer of Reyes Dynamics. And, as I'd learn over the following weeks, the closest thing Alexandra had left to family since her father passed. "You're the mechanic from New Hampshire," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus Cole. "Alexandra, this is Victor. He handles the parts of my life I don't have time for." Victor gave me a smile that stopped just under his eyes. 2 Bugatti-certified techs and a Greenwich specialist already struck out on this car. I'm curious what a New Hampshire garage sees that they didn't. I haven't looked yet. "Then look," Alexandra said, and started walking toward the car without waiting to see if I followed her. I followed. Theo, her assistant, and Elena Marsh, her second assistant. An unfortunate coincidence of a name I noticed immediately and said nothing about. Trailed a few steps behind us both. Walking past the other cars in that garage, I remember counting without meaning to. A Ferrari. A Bentley. Machines that most people will never sit inside once in their lives, parked there like umbrellas by a door. Near the back wall hung a framed photograph of an older man standing beside a much older Bugatti. Her father, I'd learn later, at an auction in 2011, 3 years before he died. Nobody in that garage had mentioned him yet, but the photograph told me he mattered more to this story than anyone realized at the time. I lifted the rear clamshell. The engine bay was immaculate. Too immaculate, honestly, for a car with 11,000 miles on it, which told me someone had detailed it thoroughly and repeatedly after every diagnostic visit. Victor stood behind me, arms crossed, watching over my shoulder like a man supervising a contractor he didn't trust. If you can even get it to idle clean for 10 straight minutes, I'll be impressed. Alexandra checked the time on her watch. I have a board call at 2:30, Mr. Cole. Start my Bugatti, and I'll double whatever they're paying you at your little shop up in New Hampshire. Her assistant Theo laughed on cue. Victor smiled down at his own shoes. I didn't answer either of them. I was already looking at something else entirely. Behind the left turbo housing, tucked hard against the firewall where most techs wouldn't think to look without a mirror, was a secondary fuel pressure regulator bracket. Hand-modified, absolutely not factory. The weld bead was clean, tight, laid down in a specific triple-pass pattern I had only ever seen one man in the world use. I crouched low and wiped a thin film of oil residue off the underside of the bracket with a microfiber cloth from my back pocket. A small stamped mark. 2 letters and a number. RV3. Reinhard Voss. His third personal side project. Built entirely outside official Bugatti production. He only ever made 5 of these brackets in his whole career. Each one for a car he personally rebuilt, off the books, as a favor to someone he genuinely respected. I had helped him weld 2 of the 5 myself. In Molsheim. Back in the summer of 2016. Did you find something? Alexandra asked, not unkindly, just efficiently, the way people talk when they're used to fast answers. I need to ask you something first. When did your father buy this car? She paused, genuinely surprised by the question. It wasn't my father's car. I bought it new in 2019 through the factory allocation program. Has anyone besides the certified shops been inside this engine bay in the last 2 years? Anyone at all? Victor's jaw tightened. Almost nothing. A flicker most people would completely miss. I don't miss things like that. It's the job. Why does that matter? Alexandra asked, glancing between the two of us. Because someone replaced a component in here that should never have been replaced. And whoever did it knew exactly what they were disabling when they did it. Victor said, a beat too fast, that every service on that car had gone through certified shops only. Nobody had asked him yet. I noticed that too. I drove home that evening with the bracket's serial number burned into my memory, the way certain numbers just stay with you, once you've lived inside them long enough. After Lily was asleep, she'd drawn Daddy's new car that afternoon. A crayon Bugatti with our shop's crooked roofline sketched in behind it. I sat down at the kitchen table and dialed a number I hadn't called in. 3 years. Reinhard Voss, 68 years old, retired now, living outside Strasbourg with his wife Marta. He picked up on the 3rd ring, same clipped, careful English he'd always had, learned as an adult, and never allowed to go soft. Marcus. It has been a long time. Reinhard. RV3. Do you remember which car that was? A long pause on the line. You found it. In Massachusetts. A 2019 Chiron Sport, nocturne black, brushed aluminum stripe. That is not possible, he said quietly, and I could hear him sitting down on his end of the line. RV3 was built in the winter of 2019 for a private client through the Molsheim concierge program. I fabricated the bracket myself, entirely off official production, as a gift. The client's father had died of the same illness that took my own father years earlier. I remember the paperwork. I remember the name on it. What name, Reinhard? Alexandra Reyes. I sat with that for a long moment, the kitchen quiet, except for the refrigerator humming behind me. I thought about Elena. About the 18 months between her diagnosis and the funeral, and the specific, aching quiet of the year after that. When Lily was still too young to understand why Daddy sometimes cried in the shop bathroom with the fan running, so she wouldn't hear it through the door. I thought about Reinhard's hands over mine, guiding them. The first time I welded a bracket that actually mattered to somebody. He told me that day that precision wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest with the metal about what it could actually hold. Some kinds of grief build things that last. Some kinds of grief get quietly exploited by people who never carried any of the weight of it themselves. I was about to find out, in detail, which one this was. The next morning I drove back down and spent nearly 5 hours documenting the entire engine bay before I touched a single bolt. 90 separate. Photographs, every visible part number, every wire routing, all of it time-stamped and backed up to 2 different drives before I disturbed anything at all. By early afternoon, I found the actual fault. A generic aftermarket fuel pressure sensor, correctly rated on paper, but seated at an angle that fought directly against Reinhard's original bracket geometry. Under sustained highway load, thermal expansion pushed that sensor a fraction of a millimeter out of tolerance. Fault triggers, then clears, then comes back. Exactly the pattern Alexandra had described to Nair on the phone. It was a 3-cent captive screw holding that sensor in the wrong position entirely. Not the wrong part. The wrong screw, in the wrong hole, placed there by somebody who understood precisely what they were breaking when they did it. That night I pulled every public filing I could find. Reyes Dynamics carried a fleet and collectibles insurance schedule, and the Chiron was listed on the most recent filing, dated November 2025, at a declared value of $1 million. That was nearly a full $1 million underwater documented. Vos provenance, Chiron with this exact fabrication history would appraise for at auction closer to $4 million once that history was formally verified. Someone had engineered an unfixable-looking fault, quietly depressed the car's insured value on paper, and positioned themselves to either total the car for a payout or acquire it personally at a fraction of what it was genuinely worth. Victor Kane had signing authority over the fleet insurance schedule. Victor Kane had unrestricted garage access. And Victor Kane, according to a service log Theo mentioned to me offhand the next day, had personally arranged the last 2 detailing appointments himself, alone with no one else present. I went back through the filing a second time that night and found something I'd missed initially. A related party LLC. Registered in Delaware 8 months earlier, with Victor listed as managing member. Its registered business purpose was, in the filing's exact words, acquisition and management of collectible transportation assets. I lay awake that night going over it again and again. The way you check a diagnosis twice before you tell someone news that's going to change how they see their own life. I called Reinhard again the following morning and read him the complete parts list, item by item. This sensor, he said after a long silence, is designed for a completely different fuel architecture entirely. Whoever installed it understood cars well enough to know it would fail slowly, in a way that would take years for anyone to trace back to a person and not just a defective part. Would you testify to that? Formally, if it came to it. I built the bracket, Marcus. My name is on the original build sheet in Anneliese Voss's own archive. Yes. I thanked him and sat for a long while at my kitchen table, Lily's crayon Bugatti still taped to the fridge behind me, feeling, for the first time in a very long time, entirely certain about something. I called an attorney I'd used once before, Dana Whitfield, who practiced commercial litigation out of Manchester. Told her I needed 30 minutes of her time and would pay her full consultation rate. I brought her the 90 photographs, the insurance filing, the Delaware LLC registration, Reinhard's account, and a one-page technical summary written the plain way I write a diagnostic report for a customer. No drama, just dates and facts. She read the entire thing in 12 minutes without saying a word. You're describing intentional sabotage tied directly to insurance fraud, she said finally, and very likely embezzlement, given that LLC was registered before the fault ever started appearing. That's what it looks like to me. And Alexandra Reyes doesn't know any of it. She doesn't know what the car actually is. She has no reason at all to question the number sitting on that filing. Dana leaned back in her chair. Why are you doing this, Marcus? You could finish the repair, collect your fee, and just go home. Because she asked me to fix a fault without knowing someone built it into her life deliberately. And because the man who taught me this work would never once have let that stand. Dana agreed to prepare a confidential memo and gave me her card to pass along. Tell her to call me about a related matter. Nothing in writing that could ever be intercepted. Let her come to us on her own terms. I finished the actual repair over the following 3 days. Sourced a period-correct factory sensor through a Bugatti parts contact I'd known in Indianapolis, reseated it against Reinhard's original bracket geometry exactly as it had been designed, and ran the car for 60 full miles without a single fault code returning. I handed Alexandra Dana's card the day I finished the work. She asked me directly what I'd found. I told her I wasn't the right person to explain it to her. Dana was, and asked her to call soon, the sooner the better. She called Dana the very next morning. 2 quiet weeks passed while forensic accountants worked in the background. On the 14th day at exactly 11:40 in the morning, Victor Kane walked into my shop in Concord without knocking. Lily was at school. I was alone at the bench, working on Harold's Land Cruiser. He set a sealed envelope down on my workbench. $150,000, Mr. Cole. In exchange, you develop a sudden case of professional uncertainty. You never signed anything formal. Your memory of that bracket gets conveniently fuzzy. That's genuinely all I need from you. I'm not interested. It's a generous offer for a man running a 2-bay garage in the middle of nowhere. Get out of my shop. His expression shifted into something colder, something I recognized from other men, other rooms, a long time ago. Your daughter goes to Rundlet Elementary. 3rd grade, Miss Foley's class. She walks over to the after-school program on Wednesdays, when your neighbor Denise can't manage the pickup herself. I'm only telling you what's already in the public record, Mr. Cole. Nothing more than that. I set the wrench in my hand down very deliberately on the bench. I walked slowly around toward him. He took a step back toward the front door. Leave. Right now. He left. I called Detective Marissa Roos of the Concord Police Department 10 minutes later and gave her the exact wording he'd used, the exact street names, the exact amount folded inside that envelope. My hands were shaking slightly by the time I hung up, and I remember being surprised by that. Within 24 hours, a protective presence was quietly arranged near Lily's school and around my shop, coordinated directly with the FBI's Boston field office. Once that threat was formally logged as witness intimidation, which folded seamlessly into the growing federal case already forming around Victor. The civil complaint, Reyes Dynamics versus Kane, was filed in Middlesex County Superior Court on May 6, 2026, alleging breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent insurance filings, and self-dealing through a related party transaction structure. Federal charges for wire fraud and attempted insurance fraud followed on May 14th. Victor was arrested at his home in Weston that morning and released later that same afternoon on a $400,000 bond. He pled guilty on July 2, 2026, to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of witness tampering. He was sentenced to 41 months in federal custody and ordered to pay $3 million in restitution directly to Reyes Dynamics. I testified for just under 40 minutes at his sentencing hearing that August. The prosecutor walked the court through the timeline of the Delaware LLC, the insurance filing dates, and the sensor installation window, one document at a time. The defense had very little to work with. The judge specifically cited the threat against Lily as an aggravating factor when she set his sentence at the very top of the federal guideline range. I remember walking out of the federal courthouse in Boston that afternoon into a grey, cold sky and calling Denise to check that Lily had gotten home from school safely, even though I already knew she had. Alexandra sent one text message that week. 4 words. Thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure yet what there was to say back. I didn't see Alexandra Reyes again until late July. She came to the shop on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, in plain jeans and a simple jacket, no assistants trailing behind her this time, carrying a small wrapped package under one arm. I should have called first, she said, standing just inside the door. You don't have to. She held out the package. Reinhard arranged this through the archive. He said you'd understand what it was without me explaining. Inside was Reinhard's actual original 2019 build log page for RV3. The real leather-bound page. Not a copy or a scan. Loaned to me directly. With his handwritten note at the bottom, half in German, half in careful English. A short line about an apprentice who understood the work without ever needing it explained to him twice. What does it say? Alexandra asked, watching my face. It says he thought I'd turn out all right. Did you? I thought about Elena, and about Lily's crayon Bugatti still taped to our refrigerator door at home. My daughter thinks so most days. The rest of it is still very much a work in progress. She was quiet for a moment, looking around the shop. At Harold's Land Cruiser still up on the lift. At the McLaren finally finished and waiting for pickup. "This is a good place," she said. "I didn't expect that, the first time I stood in here." Alexandra looked at the build log page for a long moment before speaking again. "I want to thank you properly for this. Not with money. You really don't have to." "I know, I want to anyway." She reached into her bag and set down a second, smaller item. A carved wooden model of a Chiron, commissioned, she explained. From the very same French artisan who once built display models for the Molsheim factory showroom floor. "This one's for Lily," she said. Reinhard mentioned in passing that she draws Bugattis. I turned the little wooden car over in my hands for a moment before setting it down carefully next to the build log. The way you set down something you already know is going to matter to someone else more than it does to you. "There's a restoration program just getting started at a heritage auto museum outside Boston," Alexandra continued. "They need somebody who genuinely understands factory-era fabrication techniques, not just modern diagnostics." Reinhard gave them your name before I'd even thought to ask him for one. "That's not a thank you, Alexandra. That's a job recommendation." "It's both, honestly. It's about 40 minutes from here. You could keep this shop running and still take that work on." I looked over at the build log open on my bench, and the wooden model still sitting in its tissue paper beside it, and thought hard about the kind of work Reinhard had spent his entire life teaching me to actually love doing. "I'll have the conversation with them," I said. "That's all I'm agreeing to right now." "That's genuinely all I'm asking of you." She paused at the door on her way out. "I really am sorry about the joke that day. About doubling your salary. I had absolutely no idea who you were." "You weren't supposed to know. That's not what the work is for in the first place." After she left, I sat at my workbench for a long while. The build log still open to Reinhard's handwritten note. Lily's small carved Bugatti standing beside it in the last of the late afternoon light coming through the shop windows. I thought about how a 3-cent screw, placed deliberately in the wrong hole by a man who understood exactly what he was breaking, had almost erased 7 years of one engineer's grief and one apprentice's entire education. Some things take 7 years to finally find their way back to where they belong. Some things only take a single phone call. You rarely ever know which one you're standing in the middle of until it's already over and done with. I thought, too, about Harold's old Land Cruiser still sitting in my second bay, patiently waiting its turn, and how most of the work that actually matters in a life like mine never makes it into any story at all. Lily came downstairs later that evening in her socks, saw the wooden car on the bench, and asked if it was really hers. I told her it was. She held it the rest of the night the same way she holds the wooden car her grandfather carved her, like something you don't put down. I put both cars, the old one and the new one, on her nightstand before bed. She asked if the man who carved them both knew each other. I told her no, but that they'd probably have liked each other. She thought about that for a while, and said she thought so too. So here's my question for you tonight. If you were Marcus, standing in that garage, recognizing your own mentor's work while a woman behind you laughed at a joke made directly at your expense, would you have told her the truth right? Then and there? Would you have simply walked away? Or would you have let the work speak entirely for itself, the way he ultimately did? Take a moment and really sit with that question before you answer it. Because I think most of us like to believe we'd choose the brave version of ourselves. And most of us, if we're honest, aren't entirely sure until we're standing in the moment itself. Tell me honestly in the comments below. I read every single one of them, even the ones that disagree with me. And if this story made you feel something tonight, if it reminded you of somebody in your own life who's quietly carrying more skill, more history, and more grief than anyone around them has ever fully realized, hit that like button. Subscribe to Fearless Dad Stories for more stories exactly like this one. And share this video with somebody out there who genuinely needs to hear it today. Because the people who quietly hold this world together rarely ever announce it themselves. You have to learn to look closely enough to see it. If you made it this far, thank you. Stories like Marcus's are the reason this channel exists. And every comment, every share, every subscribe tells me to keep finding more of them. Thank you for spending this time with Marcus's story, and with me. I'll see you in the next one.